The subject at the peak of mainstream deception is undoubtedly the truth of Israel, its people, and its location. And I mean, of course, why not? According to half the world's population, 4.8 billion people, those of which follow an Abrahamic religion, God's chosen people are the children of Israel. Half of the world's population believe this. If they were to know the truth about who the children of Israel truly are, none of the elites will still be able to hold any power. The entire construction and system of the world as we know it will be completely different, and the parasitic governments of the world would not be able to tyrannically suck dry the fruits of our labor as they do now. In fact, those who are in the very center of global politics are the very ones who are the placeholder for our true identity, and instead of ruling the world in righteousness, get this, all they do is increase wickedness and suffering. Absolutely none of the wickedness and sin that we see in this world would be tolerated if all the children of Israel knew who they were and did what they were supposed to do. And when it comes to the location of the Holy Land, why would they tell us the truth about where the Holy Land is? If they did that, then all of a sudden it would make sense as to why many of the indigenous tribes of North America were considered to be Israelites by most of the early European settlers. And would also make sense as to why those indigenous tribes claim to originated from Western North America. But it won't take much research to realize the true appearance of those indigenous Americans. So if they tell us where the land is, we can easily figure out who the people are. And once the whole world finds out who the people are, then they're fucked. Excuse my French. Or maybe we should blame the French. And the British, and the Spanish, and the Portuguese, and the Jew. Hold up. I'm saying too much, aren't I? I don't care. YouTube's not going to pay me anything anyway. But today, unfortunately, we're not here to discuss the location of the Holy Land, but another land that they tried just as hard to conceal. The true location of Mesopotamia. Prepare to question everything you thought you knew about the origins of humanity and envision a new history, one where the Fertile Crescent was not in the so-called old world, but in the wild expanse of the new. Or better yet, the true old world is actually in America. Hold up. Did you actually think I was just gonna gloss over the French? Let's talk about those bastards again for just 1 second. Isn't it weird that the very first Mesopotamian artifacts found by Europeans were found during the same exact time in history where the French made their first permanent settlements in Quebec? Then on top of that, at one point not only did Eastern Canada belong to France, but also Great Britain. And the funny thing about that is, the two largest and oldest museums that contain Mesopotamian artifacts are the British Museum and the Louvre in France. Last time I checked, neither of those countries colonized Mesopotamia in the Middle East. So what were they even doing over there in a time when their countries just discovered a brand new continent? Wouldn't they be too busy focusing on this brand new continent full of wonders and curiosity to go to the Middle East and start frolicking around in sand dunes there? Now, like the French, I actually have a certain disdain for the British as well. Whenever I watch a documentary and some historian starts speaking in that accent, I immediately brace myself for the bullshit. You can't spell British without the BS. Their teeth are literally knocked out of place from all the lies that have to pass through them on a daily basis. But let's get back to those facts that I just presented. That was just 2 out of several other hundreds of coincidences that you will see in this video. And I don't know about you, but when I see 3 or more coincidences that line up to something that's the complete opposite of what somebody else is telling me, I'm gonna think I've been lied to. And I don't know about you, but if I see hundreds of coincidences all pointing to the same thing, I'm not gonna think they're just coincidences anymore. Major names associated with Mesopotamia of the Torah is Padan Aram, Aram Naharim, which was translated into Mesopotamia, and Haran, as well as Mesha, Babel, Erech, Akkad, Calneh, and Ashur. Padan Aram means extended plateau. A plateau is an area of relatively level and high ground. The problem with the Padan Aram in the Middle East is that it is a flattened lowland. However, the Appalachian Plateau of eastern North America is literally an extended plateau. Mesopotamia, also known as Aram Naharim, means a highland of the 2 rivers. Aram Naharim in the Middle East is a lowland. In fact, is actually the lowest land in the entire Middle East, coming only second to the Jordan River Valley of modern Israel, which is the lowest land on earth. The North Carolina and Virginia region of the Appalachian Mountains is a highland that literally has 2 rivers coming from it, the Ohio and the Tennessee rivers. Haran means mountaineer. It was named after Haran, the brother of Abram, because Haran himself must have loved the mountains. Haran and Padan Aram are the same place according to Genesis 27:43 and Genesis 28:2. Haran was just the first of the Hebrews to leave Mesha and dwell in Padan Aram, but he moved back to Ur of the Chaldees, which is in the land of Mesha, and died there. The issue with the Haran in the Middle East is that it is not a mountainous land at all. It is no plateaus. It is just a flat land. The people of Haran, or Padan Aram, were called the people of the East in Genesis 29:1. The problem with the Middle Eastern version is that Haran would be directly north over Israel instead of east. In the American model, the Appalachian Mountains, also known as Haran or Padan Aram, is directly east of the true Israel, also known as Western North America. Ironically or unironically, just a few miles east of the Appalachian Mountains, there was a tribe known as the Wampanoag people. Their name translates to the people of the first light. The first light would be the rising sun, so their name is figurative, simply meaning the people of the east. Mesha was a mountainous region in the respective location of Babylon, but far away from the specific city of Babel. We know that Mesha was in Babylon because it is near Mount Shafir, a prominent mountain in the Babylonian territory. In fact, according to the book of Obadiah, it is the very place that the children of Judah were taken during the Babylonian captivity. It is the same region where Abram was from. Near Mount Shafir would have been Ur of the Chaldees. Abram lived in Babylon, which is truly in eastern Canada in the modern territory of Quebec. This will be proven later. We know that Abram dwelt in Mesha because that's the region where Eber and his sons migrated to, and only a few generations later, Abram himself was born. We know that Eber, Peleg, and Joktan left the city of Babel and moved to Mesha. Peleg begat Ru, Ru begat Serug, Serug begat Nahor, Nahor begat Terah and Chesed, who is the father of the Chaldeans, and Terah was the first person to be mentioned to dwell in the city of Ur, and Terah begat Abram and Haran. It never states that the people migrated from Mesha, but it does state that Terah, Chesed, Abram, and Haran dwelt in Ur of the Chaldees, which would have been built somewhere in the land of Mesha, around Mount Shafir. Then Haran migrated to Padan Aram and moved back to Ur of the Chaldees and died there. Then Abram, his wife Sarai, and his nephew Lot migrated into Padan Aram, which he then called the land of Haran in honor of his deceased brother. The problem with Ur in the Middle East is that it is a flat lowland, nowhere near any mountains, and nowhere near modern Mount Shafir either. Because the area that Abram migrated to was called Extended Plateau, in the American model, we can conclude that this is actually the Appalachian Mountains. Not too far from the Appalachians, there was a Native American tribe called the Huron Indians, and Lake Huron was named after them. Nearby is Lake Erie. Its name also is of Native American origin. Its etymology is probably from the biblical city of Ur of the Chaldees, or maybe even the city of Erech. It was named by the Iroquois Confederacy, which prior to the French conquest were called the Iroquois people by their neighboring tribe, the Algonquins. Now, the reason why the Algonquins called this people the Iroquois is because Iroquois translates into rattlesnake. And their other neighbors, the Huron people, called them Iroquois as well, which translates to black snake. The reason why they have these nicknames is because they were known to surprise attack their enemies, and they wouldn't even know that they were coming. Now, the biblical city of Erech, which is similar to Iroquois, translates to long or length because snakes are also long. It shows a possible primitive root relation between the Semitic root and the Eastern Algonquin language. The reason why the city of Erech was named Erech, meaning long or length, was probably because of the style of houses that was built in the city of Erech. These people probably lived in long houses, which are found all throughout Iroquois territory. In fact, the Iroquois or Iroquois people are known for their long houses. The name that they call themselves translates to the people of the long house. Now, if you're having a hard time making the connections here, let me help you out. Not only is the word Iroquois an Algonquin word, but it's also an Akkadian word. And in Akkadian, Iroquois translates to a wagon, a chariot, a cart. The city of Erech is simply the biblical version of the Mesopotamian city of Uruk. Uruk translates into dwelling place, abode, or house. Now, if Uruk and Erech in the Hebrew language are related, which they are, that means that Uruk actually translates into a long or a lengthy house, which if you look at ancient wagons, you will see that ancient wagons are built in the same way that long houses are built. And thus, wagons are also a dwelling place and abode, but they're simply meant to be moved instead of stabilized in one set location. When a person truly studies etymology, they'll understand how words can change over time, or they can carry over into one language to the next, with the concept still remaining the same. They will also be able to imagine how a fleet or a train of wagons may appear to be snakes off into the distance by the viewer. which could explain the possible link between the Algonquin word and the Semitic root. Similarly, Acadia of the New England territory was named after the Native American word Akkadi, which is similar to the Mesopotamian city of Akkad. Let's go to the Early Kings Chronicles. Early Kings Chronicles. And let's start off reading from the very first lines. Sargon, king of Agade. Agade is the same thing as Akkad. Sargon, king of Akkad. We know that the Babylonians called Nimrod Sargon. Sargon is Nimrod. Sargon, king of Akkad, came to power during the reign of the fertility goddess, and he had neither rival nor equal. His splendor over the lands, it diffused. He crossed the sea in the east. In the 11th year, he conquered the western land to its furthest point. He brought it under one authority. He set up his statues there and ferried the west's booties across on barges. He stationed his court officials at intervals of 5 double hours and ruled in unity the tribes of the lands. So this is what the Early Kings Chronicles says about Nimrod. And it says one thing for sure, that he was the king of Akkad. That's the first thing. He came from Akkad or Acadia, right? We already talked about that's the area from northern New York all the way to New Brunswick and Maine. But it says that he crossed the sea in the east. So he had to cross the sea to get to Babylon, right? Because we know that Nimrod built the Tower of Babel in Babylon. So he had to come from Akkad to go to Babylon, right? But it says that he conquered the lands of the west to his farthest point. He went all the way to the western edge of Quebec, and he conquered all those peoples and brought them under his rule. Remember, Nimrod was a mighty hunter, and in Jasher, Nimrod is described as a warrior, conquering a lot of people. But let's pay attention to the part that said he crossed the sea in the east. The sea would be that bay of the St. Lawrence River. You would have to cross that sea to get to Quebec, where he built the Tower of Babel. In the Middle East, there is no sea that you have to cross to get from Akkad to Babel at all. Also, look what it says in line 6. And ferry the west's booty across on barges, meaning Sargon went from Akkad to the west, which is Babylon, and conquered those peoples, took spoil from those peoples, and sent that spoil across the sea on ferries back to Akkad. Remember, there is absolutely no sea in between Akkad and Babel in the Middle East, but in America there is. And I just want you guys to know this. All these tablets and all these chronicles were indeed taken from America, just like the scriptures that we read every day were taken from America. Remember, these tablets were actually discovered in unknown excavations. Understand that these are some of the most important tablets ever found in history. It gives us key understandings to ancient civilizations. There's no way these excavations that they found these tablets are truly unknown. It's not unknown. They know everything about where they get their tablets from. It's just classified information. So you don't know, you're not gonna know where they found it because they're not gonna let you in on that information. But we know that they got it from North America. It's simple. Perhaps even New Brunswick or Canada, a place around that area. The Mohawk Indians' original name for Southeast Canada was Kanata, which means city, which is a striking similarity to the Mesopotamian city of Kalna or Kinna, which is the original name for Kalna that we can see in Genesis. Even further north, we had the Innu Indians. Although these are Siberian descended Native Americans, I must point out that the Innu tribe has an Akkadian name. Innu in Akkadian means us, our, or ours. According to the Native American tribe, their name means human being, which from an etymological standpoint is not that far off. Perhaps they learned the Akkadian language from the original people who they came into contact with in that region. Of similar etymology is the Eno or Inu River of North Carolina. In Akkadian, Inu means fountain or spring. Along with Akkadian etymological similarities is Sumerian etymological similarities. A Sumerian word that we're all familiar with is Anunnaki. In Quebec, there was the Innu people, the Anishinaabe people, and the Abenaki people. If we were to combine certain parts of all these names, we will literally get the word Anunnaki, showing that there are possibly a few linguistic cognates between these languages and ancient Sumerian. The Abenaki people lived just a few miles southeast of where the land of Mesha would have been, on the cusp of Babylon, in the land of Akkad. This was the birthplace of Nimrod, also known as Sargon of Akkad, who was documented at the time to have communed with the actual gods themselves in person. This could point to the idea that the Anunnaki probably descended in the land of Akkad, and therefore the original legends of the Anunnaki probably originate in this region. So did the Abenaki people have any type of oral traditions that are similar to the Mesopotamian oral traditions of the Anunnaki? Well, the answer is yes. Absolutely yes. And if you don't believe me, just read what you see on the screen. The Anunnaki were a group of gods who we would call the fallen, who came down to give humanity certain wisdoms and knowledge of good and evil, but after the flood. And with the Abenaki, they believed in the very same ideals. Eber, Peleg, and Joktan left Babel during the construction of the tower and dwelt further south in Mesha. Fittingly today in Connecticut dwell the Mesha tribe, whose name probably came from the land of Mesha, where the people probably once dwelt, or their name probably comes from the tribe of Manasseh, as the nearby Massachusetts tribe actually claimed to descend from.
This is my tribe right here. But it's not Cuban though, it's incorrect.
What is it?
It's Massachusetts. It's a little different. But it's Manasseh, it's the same thing.
What you mean, like, but your people come from Cuba?
Nah.
Where your people come from?
Israel.
Israel? What part of Israel?
Israel that's here. Israel that's here. Israel that's here.
Manasseh, okay, but what do they call your people on this side of the earth?
Massachusetts.
Massachusetts, that's a native tribe?
Abram and Haran still lived in Mesha. They just built a city called which means light. Because the children of Peleg and Joktan who lived in Mesha were astronomers and studied light. Interestingly, the word Abenaki translates to the people of the flickering light. Maybe this was a people who were simply interested in light. Haran was probably given his name because he was known to have journeyed through the mountains of Padan Aram and Mount Shafar of Mesha, which according to Genesis 10 and 30 was a mountain of the east, in the respective location of Babylon, of course. According to Genesis 10 verse 10, the entire area where Nimrod built his kingdom was called the land of Shinar. If we take the R off of Shinar, we have Shinar, the root of Anishinaabe, the people who live in this region. Their name means people who were lowered, and this makes me think about the people who built the Tower of Babel but were forced to the ground by Yahuwah himself. These people were trying to ascend themselves above the throne of God after the orders of Nimrod, and the Tower of Babel was simply an artificial mountain made to mimic the mountain of God, as Nimrod was trying to replace Yahuwah himself. The Babylon of the Middle East does not fit the biblical description of ancient Babylon. In scripture, Babylon is described as a northern mountainous wooded region that sits upon many waters with additional islands off in the distance of the coast. Not only do many scriptures call Babylon the land of the north, but we also know that the climate overall was different in Babylon than it was in the land of Israel, because according to the book of Ezekiel chapter 1, Ezekiel looks up into the sky when he was in the Babylonian captivity and describes something peculiar. A bright orange and other crystal-like colored light enfolding in itself or carrying itself in the sky before the spiritual beings of Yah appeared before him. This description can only apply to the aurora borealis that appears near and in the Arctic Circle. The fierceness and hunger for conquest that the Babylonians had is also an indicative trait of a northern empire. Because empires further north were more scarce in resources because of the cold climate, and therefore they would have to expand their territories and extract resources from other people, causing them to be more involved in conquest. This includes the Vikings, the British, other northern Europeans, the Mongolians, the Tartarians, or even the Siberian descended Native Americans, if we want to get technical, all of which created some of the largest empires known to man. At some point, Babylon conquered almost every single land mentioned in scripture. Therefore, they must have been very high in demand for resources. The problem with Babylon in the Middle East is that it is not north of Israel. It's actually directly east of Israel. Yes, Babylon should be somewhat east of Israel because it is near Padan Aram, or the people of the east. However, it is supposed to be towards the north. And Babylon in the Middle East is not at all north, respective to Israel. We know that it is mountainous, or at least not completely flat, because Nebuchadnezzar's statue was erected in the plain of Dura in Babylon, according to Daniel 3:1. But the question is, why did the text have to say it was erected in the plain of Dura instead of simply the land of Dura? To let the reader know that the area that the statue was erected in was a flat ground in comparison to its surrounding mountainous ground. Also, the city of Sepharad of Babylon is named after Mount Shepher. And according to Jeremiah 51:25, Babylon is called a destroying mountain. Obviously, because Babylon was known for going to war against all its surrounding peoples and spoiling them. Most of the mountains of Quebec are part of the same mountain range known as the Laurentian Mountains. And that makes sense as to why Daniel was thrown into the den of lions. A den of lions means a cave of lions, and caves are only found in karst landscapes. Karst is a highly erodible rock such as limestone, dolostone, or gypsum. Eastern Canada has karststone mountains and plenty of caves, but southern Iraq has no karst landscapes at all and no caves. Neither does it have any lions. However, modern Quebec has a species of cave-dwelling mountain lion called the eastern cougar, which is often found living in the caves and cliffs on the mountainside. We know it's supposed to be forested because according to Psalms 137:2, Babylon has willow trees. Willow trees only grow in wet forested areas amongst other types of trees, and they grow best in cool locations like Quebec. We know that Babylon is a land surrounded by water because Jeremiah says this concerning Babylon. Jeremiah 51:13. O thou that dwellest upon many waters, abundant in treasures, thine end is come, and thy measure of thy covetousness. The sea is come upon Babylon. She is covered with the multitude of the waves thereof. Because Yahuwah hath spoiled Babylon, and destroyed out of her the great voice. When her waves do roar like the great waters, a noise of their voice is uttered. Scripture then goes on to say that an extreme flood will come upon Babylon and leave it having many pools of water. Isaiah 14:22, for I will raise up against them, saith Yahuwah of hosts, and cut off from Babylon the name and the remnant, and son and nephew, saith Yahuwah. And I will make it a possession for the bittern and pools of water, and I will sweep it with the besom of destruction, saith Yahuwah of hosts. Today, Eastern Canada has more lakes than any other part of the earth due to extreme flooding caused by glacial melts. The most recent being the glacial melts that took place in the 6th century AD during the Lalia period. But according to prophecy, there should be a major drought before the flood. Jeremiah 50:38, a drought is upon her waters, and they shall be dried up. For it is a land of graven images, and they are mad upon their idols. Therefore the wild beasts of the desert and the wild beasts of the island shall dwell there, and the isles shall dwell therein, and it shall be no more inhabited forever, neither shall it be dwelt in from generation to generation. Pay attention to that last part, because southern Iraq is a lot more densely populated than Eastern Canada. Now when it comes to droughts, y'all might have wanted to dry up Babylon first, because droughts maximize the effect of flooding because the ground becomes so hard that the water cannot drain into the ground. But a key point of this prophecy is in verse 39, which states beasts of the islands, which may indicate ancient Babylon had islands. Another example of this is Isaiah 13:22. And the wild beasts of the islands shall cry in their desolate houses, and dragons in their pleasant palaces. And her time is near to come, and her days shall not be prolonged. This verse not only states that Babylon has islands, but also the islands have wildlife, possibly including dragons. The islands should also have abandoned architecture. On the islands of Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, we find these things. Archaeologists are digging up ancient structures by the dozens in those regions. They are a remnant of an ancient past, of a long forgotten culture. The same can be said with the mainland of Eastern Canada and the New England territories. There are thousands of ancient mysterious structures, megaliths, and miles of walls running through the forests of northeastern North America till this day. These regions are scarcely populated with people today, but they are home to wildlife such as wolves, foxes, rabbits, owls, bears, and more. There are also tales of dragons in this region, like Yasindiata, also known as the meteor dragon according to Seneca mythology. It is a giant serpent that dwells in the deep areas of the rivers and lakes of Canada, especially Lake Ontario. This serpent could fly on a trail of fire, and it could also spew fire, which has led it to be viewed as analogous to European dragons. Also, the underwater panther called Mesha by the Ojibwe is one of the most important of several mythical water beings among many indigenous peoples of the northeastern woodlands and the Great Lakes. Its head and body resembles a panther, but it has scales all over its body and a long tail like a reptile. Now the question is Mushushu Mishi Peshu? So who is Mushushu? And I just described who Mishi Peshu is, but who is Mushushu? Mushushu, according to Wikipedia, is a creature from ancient Mesopotamian mythology, a mythological hybrid. It is a scaly animal with hind legs resembling the talons of an eagle, lion-like forelimbs, a long neck and tail, 2 arms on its head, a snake-like tongue, and a crest. The Mushushu most famously appears on the fertility goddess gate of the city of Babylon, dating to the 6th century BCE. Now, what is Mishi Peshu? I just described to you what Mishi Peshu is, but let's run it back for a second. An underwater panther called Mishi Peshu is one of the most important of several mythological water beings among many indigenous peoples of the northeastern woodlands and the Great Lakes region, particularly among the Anunnaki. Mishpeshu translates into the Great Lynx. It has the head and paws of a giant cat, but is covered in scales and has dagger-like spikes running along its back and tail. Now let's look at some of the attributes of Mishipeshu. It has head and paws of a giant cat, scales running along its whole body, namely its back and tail. It has dagger-like spikes running along its back and tail. It has horns that symbolize its power. As you can see, they're kind of like bison-like horns. It has paws, palm paws that enable it to swim fast. As you can see, they're also sharp as well. It has visible catfish-like whiskers on its nose. Now understand that clay bricks only last up to 500 years before being so heavily eroded that they return back to the soil. So these depictions that they show you on the walls of modern Babylon are modern forgeries. Okay, so those buildings that you see in the Middle East today that has the Mushushu on it, those were built by charlatans in the 1800s. They went over there and constructed those buildings and told you, look, this is the city of Babylon. This is the city of Uruk. This is the city of Nineveh. This is the city of Ur of the Chaldees. But they built all these buildings, and we know this because clay doesn't last more than 500 years. Clay is just soil. It returns back to the earth, and these bricks are painted. Paint doesn't last that long. Paint doesn't last 2,600 years, guys. So how the heck do you have a painted wall? How the heck do you have the detail of this dragon scales on the brick showing absolutely no signs of weathering and erosion, even though it was exposed to the elements for over 2,600 years? So, you know, it's very, very commonsensical that the people who faked history constructed these buildings. These are the original depictions of Mushushu, likely stolen from Eastern Canada. And the reason why I say that is because since they're smaller, they were most likely inside of some type of container buried under the ground, so they weren't really exposed as much to the elements. And with that being said, they have more of a likelihood of being authentic. These ancient images look even more cat-like, and it's probably the true inspiration for the Eastern Canadian legend of a scaled panther. But they depict two different types of horns, some that stick straight up and others that curve like a bison. That's important. Now, I want to talk about the color of Mishipeshu and the color of Mushushu. Because copper is a shade of red, we can conclude that they were both the same color. Now, when we're talking about the etymology of Mushushu, the form Mushushu is the Akkadian nominative of the Sumerian Mushhush, which means reddish snake. Reddish snake. Now, when we're talking about Mishipeshu, the underwater panther of the Great Lakes, is sometimes said to have copper scales and horns. And we look at the colors, the color of it is copper. Copper is basically reddish, right? It's reddish. So they were the same color. Now let's look at a detailed description of Mushushu of Babylon. It has curved bison-like horns, feline body, long cat-like tail, reptilian scales, serpent-like neck, sharp claws, downward pointing ears, whiskers or gills, and red color. Now, when we look at the description of Mishipeshu, it has curved bison-like horns, feline body, long cat-like tail, reptilian scales, serpent-like neck, sharp claws, downward pointing ears, whiskers or gills, red color, and the only thing different between Mishipeshu and Mushushu is Mishipeshu has spikes on his back. Mushushu does not have spikes on his back. Okay, so that's the only thing different. You know, I think that difference may be because of the extinction of the creature. During the Babylonian times, I think the dragon actually existed with them, and they were actually able to see it and give it a detailed description. but eventually they probably hunted them, ate them, whatever, to the point where they no longer seen it, and it just became a myth and a legend. So they kind of exaggerated a little bit, probably gave it spikes on the back to make it seem more powerful, more scary. So that's just my theory. Now, even in the depiction of the supreme Babylonian god, Mushushu is seen floating on a body of water. So Mushushu might be an aquatic reptile, just like Meshipeshu was described to be. Dragons existed in all mythologies around the world, and most likely did actually exist. But according to human nature, dragons would have been seen as a threat, and it's very likely that they were wiped out by humans themselves. Just like the grizzly bear, which used to dwell all around the country, can only be found in certain pockets of the country now. But when it comes to the islands, the Middle Eastern Babylon has only one island, but both scriptures in the Hebrew text refer to the islands being plural, meaning that there should be multiple islands off the coast of Babylon. And the one island off the coast of the Babylon in the Middle East is known as Felaka Island. And though it has ruins of ancient architecture, which may or may not be authentic, there is no significant land-dwelling wildlife on that island. There should also be a serious stretch of land with quite the terrain between Babylon and Jerusalem, as the journey took exactly 5 months for Ezra to complete, Ezra 7 and 8. And he came to Jerusalem in the 5th month, which was in the 7th year of the king. For upon the first day of the 1st month began he to go up from Babylon, and on the first day of the 5th month came he to Jerusalem, according to the good hand of his God upon him. The path from modern Babylon to modern Jerusalem hosts a completely flat and empty terrain with little obstacles in the way. It would only take just over a month to complete. The path between Quebec and Utah, or between the true Babylon and the true Jerusalem, contains a wide variety of landscapes and obstacles. In the east, the land would have still been full of lakes even before Babylon flooded, as it was already called the land that sits upon many waters. With addition to the lakes, it would also have been very hilly, and one would have to walk up and down the hills to get to their destination. In the central region, one's main goal is to simply avoid the Mississippi River basin, because these rivers at this point are virtually impossible to cross on foot, so they would have to stay north of it in central Canada until they reach the Canadian Rockies. In the western part, we are entering the Rockies. Believe it or not, this is actually the easiest part of the entire journey, because the Rockies will lead you directly south into Jerusalem. There are many rivers in this location as well, but at this point the rivers are very thin and weak enough to cross on foot. One would simply have to make sure that they do not get thrown off course by the mountains, and they would simply meander through the valleys in a completely southward direction. The total journey would be around 2,900 miles. If the terrain is completely flat and obstacle-free, this journey would take just over 3 months to complete. But due to the fact that there are many obstacles present on this journey, it would not be hard to imagine this journey taking 5 months with the aid of God Himself. Not to mention the remains of the Tower of Babel can still be seen in Quebec today. If we look at the southeastern part of Quebec, we will see a gigantic blue ring. This blue ring actually displays the amazing feats of ingenuity humans can have when we are all working together. It also shows why Yah had to separate humanity, because if we were to continue to advance and thrive like this as time went on, we would do some very great damage to the earth and its ecosystems. Just look at us now. All the countries of the world have united through cellular and radio communication and the internet, And we have accomplished great technological feats that have unfortunately ultimately doomed the ecosystems of the earth. But let's not go off topic here. Ancient humans moved millions of tons of earth to create gigantic bricks for this tower. And what is left behind is a great ring-shaped canal that later filled with water. Think of the Tower of Babel not as some monument constructed to anger Yahuwah, but think of it as a large beehive, or more accurately, an anthill for humanity as a whole. It was constructed in the fashion of a stepped pyramid, except it was much larger than any pyramid or even any mountain for that matter. It was constructed by creating a solid foundation, a slab of brick, one upon another, upon another, upon another, upon another, till it surpassed the clouds in its height. All the rooms in the tower would have been built on the outer layer, like caves in the mountain for all humanity to dwell in. Just like a mountain, the base of it would have been covered in green plant and vegetation, and the layer just above that would have been covered completely in snow, but the rest of it would have been completely above the clouds. From miles away it would have been visible, looking like some type of mountain that sticks straight up out of the earth. The tower was so high that according to the book of Jasher, it took an entire year for one brick to make it from the base to the top. So if this tower literally reached the heaven, which would be the top of the atmosphere, about 60 miles high in the air, then how did the people at the top of the tower even breathe? Because when you get only 5 miles high in the atmosphere, the oxygen level is almost depleted and humans would not be able to breathe. So don't assume that the people at the top of the tower were actually people. The book of Jasher states that there were 600,000 men who participated in constructing the tower. But the problem with that is Nimrod was the son of Cush, who was the son of Ham. Therefore, this was only 3 generations after the flood. How are there already 600,000 men on earth? Because not all of these men were actually men. If we read the book of Isaiah chapter 14, Ezekiel 28, and Psalms 82, then we'll know exactly who most of these quote unquote men really were. And they were not humans. They were something else entirely, and they were jealous of Yah and wanted an entire mountain to themselves that basically mimicked the holy mountain of God in the North Pole. They transformed themselves into humans, and therefore they died like men. But before this, they enslaved humanity, giving Nimrod this idea, having him rule over the nations of the earth. If you think about it, it would actually be impossible for humans to build the Tower of Babel alone, because whoever created the blueprint for this tower would have had to use the Pythagorean theorem to determine the diameter of the base. But they can't determine the diameter of the base without first knowing the length of the theoretical triangle needed to build the tower. And the length of that triangle would also be the height of the tower. And in order to know the necessary height of the tower, they would first have to know the distance between the heaven and the earth. And the only way you can know that is if you have been to heaven before. For more information on this, stay tuned for my video that's gonna come in the future called The Secret Truth of the Tower of Babel. Why am I so confident that this was actually a tower at one point, even though scientists are constantly telling us that this is an impact crater from an ancient asteroid? Well, the clue lies in the book of Jasher, Jasher 9:38. And as to the tower, which the sons of men built, the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up 1/3 thereof. And a fire also descended from heaven and burned another third. And the other third is left to this day. And it is of that part which was aloft, and its circumference is 3 days' walk. An average person walks 2.9 to 3 miles per hour. An average day is 12 hours. It was far too dangerous to travel at night at those times. This means that in one day, a person could travel between 34 and 36 miles. Therefore, in 3 days, a person could travel anywhere between 102 and 108 miles. And as you can see from the image here, the circumference of this quote-unquote island is exactly 107 miles. So the math adds up literally perfectly. The only reason why scientists believe that this is a meteor impact is simply because there are meteorite minerals found in the soil around the area. But if we go back to the scripture of Jasher, it says that 1/3 of the tower was destroyed from a fire from heaven. What if that was the meteor strike that left all that meteorite material in the ground? This definitely does not resemble any meteor impact on Earth, as the other ones are simply a bowl shape in the ground, not a ring where there is elevated ground in the middle. I could also imagine the absurd weight of the gigantic tower itself causing it to sink into the earth. Today, east of that ring, there is a peculiarly shaped mountain, almost the shape that you would expect the Tower of Babel to be, situated as if something struck it and made it fall down. If this is the case, it's only 1/3 of the tower, and it extended itself exceedingly as it fell to the ground.
The Babylonian map of the world, and it shows you a map of the world on this chronicle, on this tablet. And I find it very interesting because this does not look like a map of the world, and I think that's a deceptive name for this tablet. According to scholars, this is all the known world to Babylon, which is simply false because Babylon's empire stretched across, apparently, according to what they tell us, from the Persian Gulf all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. And their territory was not perfectly round at all. It was a irregular shape, and it was not surrounded by a circular, bitter river as what it says on this map. What's very interesting about it is in the middle of it, there's something that says Babylon. And there are a lot of circles inside of this place, and it has certain cities. Really, it's telling you that all these nations came out of Babylon. This is why we see these triangles coming out of this circle. These triangles are showing you regions. It says in every triangle, regions, regions, regions. In every triangle, it translates to regions. However, one of those triangles says something very, very, very interesting. It says, Great Wall, 6 leagues in between where the sun is not seen. Great Wall, 6 leagues in between where the sun is not seen. 6 leagues is equivalent to 20 miles long. It says there is a 20-mile wide wall that's so big that when you're standing on the side of it, the sun cannot be seen. Notice it doesn't say 6 leagues long. It says 6 leagues in between, which means the width of this wall, not the length of this wall, the width of this wall is 6 leagues, which is 20 miles. If you got a wall that's 20 miles wide, it's either not a wall or it's the Tower of Babel that fell to the ground. Let's look at the Lewis Babel Ecological Reserve. Now, in the Lewis Babel Ecological Reserve, we see something very, very similar to what we saw on the map. We see that there is a ring around a circular island, and that ring is a river, right? Just like on that map said, a bitter river. And we also see that there is a sliver of water that comes into the island, right? And there's also a sliver of water that goes into the island on the map. As we can see, there is a huge mountainous structure going northeast of the island. And this mountainous structure is 20 miles wide, exactly 6 leagues.
There's 2 additional things I want to tell you about this mountain range that is northeast of René Levasseur Island in Quebec. This mountain range is called the Boissonade Mountain Range, which means the wooded mountain. But if we zoom in right here, it says Tour Boissonade. Do you know what that means in French? It doesn't mean Boissonade Mountains. It means Boissonade Tower. The wooded tower. It's literally called a tower. It's almost like when the French came here, they knew that this area is the Tower of Babel. The middle of it has a mountain that's literally called Mount Babel. That's the remainder of the Tower of Babel that sticks up today. And another thing I wanted to point out to you guys is the fact that it said where the sun is not seen. 6 leagues in between. That means 20 miles wide where the sun is not seen. That's because in the wintertime in Quebec, the sun stays low on the horizon. So if you're standing right here, anywhere north of the tower, you're not going to be able to see the sun. In the wintertime, you're going to be under a shadow constantly. There's a shadow. In the wintertime, this whole area is shadowed. So I want to point that out. The sun stays low on the horizon all winter. Even in the highest noon, the sun is low on the horizon. Okay? So that's the area where the sun is not seen. This is what you call a perfect match. Okay? Not a lot of things can be said that are perfect matches, but this is literally, guys, a perfect match. You may now be wondering, if I claim that Babylon is actually in Quebec, then what do I think of all the structures and cities that remain in Iraq today that they say are the remnants of ancient Babylon? The truth is, all those buildings and ruins were created by charlatans, Europeans, no more than 200 years ago. As you can see, this city, which they call the city of Ur, is made completely out of brick, and the brick looks brand new. When exposed to the elements, brick typically lasts no more than 500 years. So how do we have 3,000 to 4,000 year old structures made of brick still looking brand new, showing very little signs of weathering and erosion? Because they were built by Freemasons who want to lie to you about the locations of the old world places. At the end of the day, brick is made out of clay. And within 500 years, that clay will turn back into dirt, and plants will grow upon it, and it won't even be a recognizable structure at all. Hence why the structures like the Great Wall of China, which has sections made completely out of brick, are under constant reconstruction. The biblical description of the Assyrian Empire is very different from what they tell us is the Assyrian Empire in the Middle East, which is located in northwest Iraq. The biblical Assyria is described as a wooded coastal region that has many rivers. In reference to ancient Assyria, the prophet Ezekiel says, Ezekiel 31:4, the rivers made him great, the deep set him on high, with her rivers running round about his plants, and sent out her little rivers unto all the trees of the field. Therefore his height was exalted above the trees of the field, and his boughs were multiplied, and his branches became long because of the multitude of the rivers, when he shot forth. If we look at eastern North America, we'll see that the South Atlantic Gulf Basin completely matches this description. It is also forested and composed of lots of rivers. Ancient Assyria also includes parts of the Mississippi River Basin, which became a part of Assyria's territory when they took it for conquest. Assyria in the Middle East only has a few rivers. But in the American model, there's a plethora of rivers. When scripture says the deep made him great, understand that the Hebrew word for deep is tahom, which means abyss. This is the Hebrew word for the deep sea. Modern Assyria does not border the ocean at all. It is a landlocked territory. But southeastern North America does border the sea.
In 1963, in Georgia, near the Chattahoochee River, a woman by the name of Miss Jo Hearn was digging in her garden bed when she struck something hard. It was a clay tablet with writing on it. According to the book Weird Georgia by Mark Schwerman and Mark Morin, the tablet discovered by Hearn was a receipt that recorded a purchase of several sheep and goats for a ceremonial sacrifice. Now remember, this tablet was discovered in Georgia, a part of the original Assyrian territory. Much previously, in 1877, the United States invaded the Montana-Idaho regions, making war with the Nez Perce Indians. The war was intense and led to the surrender of the Nez Perce troops. Chief Joseph, the commander of the army, gave to the U.S. troops a peace offering so that their people would not be wiped out. The peace offering included a family pendant that was passed down to him by his forefathers. The pendant was a cuneiform tablet, a receipt for sheep purchased by a man named Nalu as he prepared to sacrifice them to the fertility goddess of Assyria. Near the Shawnee Creek of Oklahoma, there was also discovered a tablet that depicted the symbol of the Assyrian fertility goddess. This particular symbol is an illuminated sun with a crescent moon below it and with various cuneiform letters beneath that. Because Oklahoma was one of those territories where Mizraim and Aram touched each other, and the Aramaeans worshiped the same gods and goddesses as Assyria, it is no surprise that this artifact was found here. Near Quaker City, Ohio, an amateur Indian arrowhead collector discovered a cuneiform tablet in 1978. Its ancient provenance was established by David Owen, professor of Near Eastern Studies at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. He translated the Sumerian text, which had been composed by a man named Uri in the month of Dumazi, which is late June, in the year the Ensi, or the ruler of Karzida, was elevated. Now pay attention. The author of this tablet's name was Uri. Just like I stated previously, Uri is indeed an ancient Sumerian, Assyrian, Babylonian word. And we just so happen to have one of the Great Lakes in North America having the same exact name. Karzida was the second city of worship for the same moon god, likewise referenced by the inscription on Chief Joseph's tablet, suggesting a relationship between his family heirloom and the Quaker City find, which came to light years after his death. In the book Lost Colonies of Ancient America, a comprehensive guide to pre-Columbian visitors who really discovered America, anywhere between page 36 to 39, depending on what copy of the book you have, it states, many such the third tablets have been found in the U.S., states Professor Owen, including some tablets dug up a few years ago from the ruins of an old apartment house in Auburn, New York. So many tablets spread over half the continent, from Montana to Georgia, Ohio, and New York. So according to this professor, there's been many tablets spread around the United States, many of which are not online, many of which There's no documentation of it, but he says from Georgia to Ohio to Montana to New York. There's many more tablets that they found that I am not mentioning in this video simply because not everything is online. All of the tablets that we see on display in museums from around the world that tell you that these tablets are Assyrian, Babylonian, Sumerian in origin are truly from America. Hundreds of Michigan residents from around the 1830s till the 1920s found odd relics when digging on their property. Any media source on the Michigan relics will tell you that they are all fakes. Sure, maybe some are fakes, but they are 7,000 artifacts found by hundreds of people who never met each other. So at least some of them have to be authentic, logically speaking. Understand that the earliest of these artifacts were discovered as early as the 1830s. And the tablets that they tell us are from the Middle East were also discovered in the late 1830s and after, none before, which is very coincidental that at the same time the Michigan relics were discovered, the Middle Eastern cuneiform tablets were also discovered. When we look at this excerpt from the book Discovering the Mysteries of Ancient America, page 29, it states, when the last of the Michigan mounds were excavated around 1920, approximately 7,000 mystery tablets have been removed, some under controlled conditions. What is controlled conditions? Classified conditions. And attested by eyewitness swearing affidavits. Although the sheer magnitude of this statewide discovery made by literally hundreds of persons, most of them unknown to each other, argue convincingly on the behalf of its prehistoric authenticity. The mostly terracotta or baked clay artifacts were universally condemned as fakes by the Victorian scientists, but their ill-considered verdict may have concealed the truth about the Michigan tablets, namely that they were religious documents and teaching aids. But the truth of the Michigan tablets is that they were the remains of the Assyrian artifacts as well as even some Egyptian artifacts, as the Assyrians and the Egyptians dealt with each other. And the ones that you see when you Google Michigan relics, for the most part, are indeed fakes. But then there are some that are real and are authentic. And there are some that are so important as they had to be reclassified of being from Middle Eastern origin. It is impossible for around the same exact time for 7,000 artifacts to just be faked by hundreds of different people who did not even know each other. One particular fact about the Michigan relics is that anywhere between 7,000 to 9,000 total relics have been found, but only 250 at most are shown to the public. Think about that. Where are the rest? Clearly the ones that we see on Google are completely fake. 100%. They look like a non-artistic third grader drew them. They even have depictions of Christianity on it. Clearly we know this stuff is fake, just to make the entire idea of the Michigan relics look fake. But there have been thousands of real Michigan relics. But for the most part, we don't see them on Google. Do you know why? Because during the same time the Michigan relics were found, guess what else was found? The Babylonian tablets, the Assyrian tablets, the Epic of Gilgamesh, so on and so forth, all throughout the Middle East apparently. Strange, right? And this is just from the state of Michigan alone. The mounds of Tennessee, Louisiana, Mississippi, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, etc. all contained numerous artifacts and tablets that were excavated and hidden away by the Smithsonian or transported across the sea. In 1965, a copper medallion was discovered in Richfield, Utah. It is inscribed with cuneiform writing and appears to depict the Assyrian fertility goddess. The medallion also appears to display some Egyptian characteristics. This version is enhanced so the cuneiform writing is visible. In the 1920s, a famous Arizona sheriff who was featured on many Wild Western movies named Wyatt Earp found this Assyrian clay tablet near the Grand Canyon. Instead of reporting this artifact to the authorities, he decided to simply give it to a close friend who then passed it down to his grandchildren. It was never known to the public until the family opened up about the tablet on YouTube. If Wyatt Earp were to have given this tablet to the Smithsonian, who would have simply dismissed it as being fake, but then at the same time would have sold it to the British Museum, and it would have been labeled as Mesopotamian from the Middle East. So shall the king of Assyria lead away the Egyptians prisoners and the Ethiopians captive, young and old, naked and barefoot, even with their buttocks uncovered, to the shame of Mizraim. This tablet may have simply been dropped on the ground while the Assyrians captured Egypt. After all, this tablet wasn't that important to Assyria as it was simply a receipt. So it's clear and very evident that there was Assyrian artifacts in Georgia near the Chattahoochee River, in Montana under the possession of Chief Joseph, in Richfield, Utah, and in Arizona near the Grand Canyon. But the question is, how did these Assyrian artifacts get to North America? Let's just play devil's advocate here and pretend that the true Assyria is indeed in the Middle East. Well, if the true Assyria is indeed in the Middle East, it would be impossible for them to make their way to the United States. And why do I say that? Well, when we look at what is presented to us as Assyrian art, we will clearly see that the Assyrians did not have the knowledge of the sail. All of their boats were designed for a river. They only knew how to paddle. They did not know how to adjust a sail or to create a sail in general. Their technology was not suited for sea travel, only river navigation. And if this is the case, if they were to take any riverboat of their magnitude into the sea, it would be destroyed very quickly upon entering the Indian Ocean. Also, there would be little to no reason at all why the Assyrians would want to come all the way to the Americas. In ancient times, anytime a nation wanted to explore, it wasn't just for the sake of exploration. It was more so for trade. There would be no point for the Assyrians to trade with the Americas if they lived in the Middle East, because they could easily trade with all of East Africa, all of India, all of Iran, as well as all of Indonesia at most. They would not need to go all the way to the Americas. It's far too risky and definitely outweighs the reward. Ezekiel 31:3 states that the Assyrian was a cedar in Lebanon, of a shadowing shrewd, and of a great stature. Two things can be pointed out from this. The Assyrians traveled to Lebanon, which is north of Israel, and the Assyrians were a very tall people. The first point could explain why we see mounds in Oregon. Southern Oregon and Northern California is the true location of Lebanon. And the second point would explain why the mound builders were so tall. Here's the image of the mound builder height in comparison to the average height today. Now let's look at a prophecy against Ashur or Assyria. Numbers chapter 24 and verse 24. And ships shall come from the coast of Chittim and shall afflict Ashur and shall afflict Eber, and he shall also perish forever. This prophecy came to pass in 1539 when ships from southwestern Europe came to North America, specifically to Florida under Hernando de Soto, when he went into the east coast of the United States and slaughtered many tribes of Indians and enslaved others. The true descendants of Chittim in scripture are the Romans, and the coast of Rome was from Italy to Spain. When Rome conquered the fake Assyria, it was not by ship, because the Middle Eastern Assyria was a landlocked nation, not at all surrounded by water. When we look at the cuneiform alphabet, we see one of the letters is a pictograph of a boomerang. Now, most commonly when we think of a boomerang, we think of the Australian Aborigines. However, it should be known that the boomerang actually was used in Australia, modern Egypt, ancient Europe, as well as North America and India. However, there has never been any artifacts of boomerangs found anywhere in the Middle East. Even in Egypt, no boomerang has been found any farther north of Luxor, which is pretty much in southern central Egypt. Again, in the modern Assyria region, no boomerangs have been found belonging to the people of the ancient past. However, located in Florida in southeastern North America, Little Salt Spring is an archaeological site which opens an incredible window on ancient civilizations who supposedly lived on the cusp of the last ice age 10 to 15,000 years ago. A wooden boomerang found by archaeologists in Little Salt Springs in Florida, USA, was broken and discarded by its owner some 9,000 years ago. The portion of an oak throwing stick archaeologists call a non-returning boomerang is at least 9,000 years old and is similar to the weapons found in Australia, ancient Egypt, and Western Europe. The boomerang has also been used by the Hopi people of Arizona and several indigenous tribes of California. It is very well possible that the boomerang originated not in Australia, but in North America, specifically southeastern North America. If we read the Fall of Nineveh Chronicle, which was written by the Babylonians, who called themselves Akkadians, we will see that it describes a very detailed war that took place in Assyria. It says in the 16th year, which was around 610 to 609 BCE, in the month Ajaru, the king of Akkad, who at the time was Nabopolassar, the father of Nebuchadnezzar, mustered his army and marched to Assyria. From the month Samanu until the month Arisamna, he marched about victoriously in Assyria. In the month Arisamna, the Medes who had come to help the king of Akkad put their armies together and marched to Haran against Assur-uballit, who had ascended the throne in Assyria. Fear of the enemy overcame Assur-uballit and the army of Mizraim that had come to help him, and they abandoned the city and crossed the Euphrates. The king of Akkad reached Haran and fought a battle and conquered the city. He carried off the vast booty of the city and the temple. In the month Adaru, the king of Akkad left his troops and their camp and went home. The Medes who had come to help the king of Akkad withdrew. In the 17th year, which is around 609 to 608 BCE, in the month Du'uzu,
Assur-uballit, king of Assyria, with a large army from Egypt, crossed the river Euphrates and marched against Haran to conquer it. So let me get something straight. When Nabopolassar pulled up to the city of Haran, Assur-uballit and his entire Mitzri army fled and crossed the Euphrates. Well, where did they flee to? Since most of his army were from Mizraim, they fled to Mizraim. But in order to get to Mizraim, they simply just had to cross the Euphrates River, which means that Mizraim is simply on the other side of the Euphrates River, which also means that Assyria and Mizraim border each other. While reading the scriptures and while reading the Mesopotamian chronicles, it becomes very clear and obvious that Mizraim and Assyria bordered each other, fought together, and fought against each other, dealt with each other, traded with each other, etc., etc. They weren't two nations completely separated by a strip of land in the Middle East. Then when Assur-uballit returned back to his land, he had to cross the Euphrates again, this time having an even larger Mitzri army because he simply went to Egypt. Reading from the Nebuchadnezzar Chronicle, it states in the first line, in the 21st year, which was around 605 or 604 BCE, the king of Akkad, Nabopolassar, stayed in his own land. Nebuchadnezzar, his eldest son, the crown prince, mustered the Babylonian army and took command of his troops. He marched to Carchemish, which is on the bank of the Euphrates, and crossed the river to go against the Mizraim army, which lay in Carchemish. So are you telling me that Nebuchadnezzar crossed the Euphrates and immediately was in front of the Mitzri army, which means that, again, Mizraim bordered the Euphrates River, just like it says in the scriptures, and just like it said in the other chronicle, the Fall of Nineveh Chronicle. However, this does not appear in the Middle East model whatsoever. Just like how Babylon was eventually punished for their iniquity and their land was changed as a result of that, and the description of that punishment matches the American landscape, we can see the same thing with the Assyrian landscape when Assyria was punished for their iniquity. If we read in Isaiah chapter 7 and 23, in the context of Assyria, if we go on and read up, we'll see that it's talking about Assyria. Verse 23, it says, and it shall come to pass in that day that every place shall be where there were 1,000 vines and 1,000 shiverlings, it will be for briars and thorns. So the first thing it says is that all Assyria's farmland will go unkept and become full of weeds and thorns. Verse 24 says, with arrows and with bows shall men come thither, because all the land shall become briars and thorns. So because all the crops don't grow anymore, the people there will have to be hunters in order to survive. So they'll have to go through the land with bow and arrow. No longer is it a huge society that's dependent on the rivers and the agriculture like it used to be. And verse 25 says, and on all hills that shall be digged with the mattock, there shall not come thither the fear of briars and thorns, but it shall be for the sending forth of oxen and for the treading of lesser cattle. So this verse is saying the hills will not be cultivated anymore. It's not going to be full of agriculture. It's not going to be dug up. It's not going to be plowed. It's not going to be tilled anymore. But it will be full of cattle, baby cattle and adult cattle, which will be sent forth. What does that mean? Sent forth. First, let's look at the average landscape of the eastern United States. As you can see, it's full of wild grasses. You know, no agricultural plants, nothing really that we could feed ourselves and feed our families with. You know, a lot of the stuff might be edible, but that's not really gonna give you all the nutrition your body needs, right? So if you lived in this area in ancient times, you will have to depend on the animals that live in this region for survival. If we look at the word for thorns, it should say weeds or wild growth, shaith, scrub, wild growth of weeds. So it's not necessarily thorns, just thorns that's going to cover the land, but it's also talking about wild plants, weeds, stuff that we can't really benefit from. Now you remember when it says the hills shall be full of oxen and cattle, the sending forth of oxen and cattle? What does that mean? Have you ever heard of the buffalo jump? Native Americans would ride horses into a herd of buffaloes, and the herd of buffaloes would run down a hill or a cliff and end up falling and dying, and then the American Indians would take the bison and feed their families with them for a long time, and they would dry the meat, and they would eat this meat for years upon years, and they'll do it again and again and again. And then the Europeans saw that this is how those people fed themselves, so they destroyed all the bison, all the buffalo in the region to cut off their food supply, because there was no farmland in this region. So they depended pretty much solely on the buffalo for food. But in the other parts of the United States that did have agriculture, like the southern and coastal parts of the United States, the European also burned all the farmland and all the produce to starve out the Indians. But when we're talking about most of Assyria's territory, the people who lived there, they went across the land with bow and arrow, because that's how they survived, to hunt these buffaloes and to chase them and send them forth across the hills, just as it says in Isaiah chapter 7. The hills shall be for the sending forth of oxen. Verse 24, with arrows and with bows shall men come thither, because all the land will become briars and thorns. So you can't depend on the land for food anymore. You have to depend on the things you hunt for survival now. So that's how Assyria was cursed. And all the people who lived in Assyria were cursed. This is their punishment. Now, if you look at Assyria's territory, you'll see that 90% of all of Assyria was just covered in these oxen. You understand? And it was just covered in this prairie land, this steppe, this field of just shrubs and weeds that we couldn't really eat. So they had to depend on those bison for survival. This does not match the Middle Eastern Assyria. Can you guys show me one point in history after ancient Assyria fell where Assyria in the Middle East was just full of hunters who went around the land hunting oxen and chasing them down hills and cliffs? We can't find that in the Middle East. We can only find this in North America. This is another perfect match.